When I turned 18, my parents locked me in my room and told me I'd never survive in the real world. They said someone like me, with Down syndrome, wasn't capable of living independently. That same night, I packed a bag with $200 and escaped through my bedroom window. 10 years later, they're standing at the door of my $15 million Malibu mansion, asking if they can visit. I just smiled. What they don't know is that I'm now worth more than they ever dreamed possible, and I built it all from nothing. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Scarlett Morrison, and for the first 18 years of my life, I believe the world was exactly as small as my parents told me it was. Growing up in suburban Columbus, Ohio with Down syndrome meant living inside invisible walls that my parents built higher every single day. Our house on Maple Street looked normal from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, the American dream in miniature. But inside, it was my prison. "Scarlett, honey, you can't go to Sarah's birthday party," my mother would say, her voice dripping with that familiar mixture of pity and fear. My father would nod from behind his newspaper, adding his usual refrain, "The world is dangerous for someone like you, sweetheart. We're just protecting you." Someone like me. Those 4 words haunted every conversation, every decision, every dream I dared to whisper. I spent my days in our living room watching other kids my age walk past our window on their way to school, to friends' houses, to lives I wasn't allowed to live. My education came from homeschooling materials my mother selected, always simplified, always assuming I couldn't handle real academics. But here's what they didn't know. I was teaching myself programming on an old laptop I'd found in our basement. While they thought I was doing coloring books upstairs, I was learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from free online tutorials. The internet became my window to a world they insisted I couldn't be part of. "Mom, I want to apply to community college," I announced one morning over breakfast, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. My mother's face went pale. "Absolutely not," my father said, his voice sharp and final. "College is out of the question, Scarlett. You're not ready for that kind of environment." "But I've been learning programming, and I think I could—" "Programming?" my mother laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Honey, that's just playing around on the computer. You need to be realistic about your limitations." Limitations, another word that followed me everywhere. That night, lying in my childhood bed surrounded by stuffed animals I'd outgrown years ago, I made a decision that would change everything. I was 18 years old, legally an adult, and I was done living in the cage they'd built for me. I started planning my escape. For weeks, I pretended everything was normal while secretly preparing. I saved every dollar from the small allowance they gave me. I researched bus routes to California, where the tech industry thrived. I practiced coding late into the night, building a portfolio of simple websites and applications. The hardest part wasn't the planning. It was looking at my parents every day, knowing I was about to break their hearts. Despite everything, I loved them. I knew their overprotection came from love, even if it was suffocating me. But love without trust isn't really love at all. It's fear wearing a mask. The morning I left, I waited until they went to their weekly grocery shopping trip. I packed a single backpack with clothes, my laptop, and the $200 I'd managed to save. I left a letter on my pillow. "Mom and Dad, I love you, but I can't live in a world where everyone believes I'm less capable than I am. I need to prove to myself and to you that I can build something meaningful with my life. Please don't try to find me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Love, Scarlett." As I walked to the Greyhound station, every step felt like breaking free from chains I'd worn so long. I'd forgotten they were there. The bus to Los Angeles would take 3 days, and I had no idea what waited for me on the other side. But for the first time in my life, I was choosing my own path. The Greyhound bus pulled into downtown Los Angeles at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide my life into before and after. I stepped off that bus with my backpack, my laptop, and exactly $127 left in my pocket after buying food during the 3-day journey. The smell of exhaust fumes mixed with something I couldn't identify. Later, I'd learn it was the scent of ambition and desperation that permeates every corner of this city. Los Angeles was nothing like Columbus. The buildings stretched towards the sky like concrete fingers, and the streets buzzed with an energy that made my heart race. People moved with purpose, talking rapidly into phones, carrying briefcases and coffee cups like they were racing against time itself. For a moment, standing there in the bus terminal, I felt smaller than I ever had in my parents' house. But then I remembered why I was here. My first priority was finding somewhere to sleep. The youth hostel I'd researched online cost $35 a night, which I couldn't afford to spend for long. I checked in for 3 nights, giving myself a deadline: find work and housing by Friday or figure out how to survive on the streets. The hostel was a revelation. My roommates were travelers from around the world, a backpacker from Germany, an aspiring actress from Tennessee, and a street artist from Mexico City. None of them looked at me with pity or spoke to me like I was fragile. They treated me like what I was, another young person chasing a dream in the city of angels. "What brings you to LA?" asked Maria, the artist, as we sat in the common room that first evening. "I'm going to build apps," I said, surprised by how confident I sounded. "I taught myself programming, and I want to work in tech." "That's badass," she replied, and I felt something I'd never experienced before: respect from a stranger who didn't know about my Down syndrome, who was judging me purely on my ambitions. The next morning, I started my job hunt. I quickly learned that without a college degree, a portfolio, or professional references, getting hired at a tech company was nearly impossible. But I refused to give up. I spent my days in the public library using their free internet to apply for entry-level positions and improve my coding skills. I learned about frameworks like React and Node.js, diving deeper into the programming languages I'd only scratched the surface of back home. By Thursday, my money was running dangerously low, and I hadn't heard back from a single employer. Panic started creeping in. What if my parents were right? What if I really wasn't capable of making it on my own? That's when I met David Chen. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Santa Monica, nursing a single cup of coffee I'd made last 3 hours while working on a practice app, when a man in his 30s approached my table. "Excuse me," he said, "I couldn't help but notice your code. Are you a developer?" "I'm learning, self-taught." David smiled and gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Mind if I sit? I'm David Chen. I run a small startup downtown. What you're building there looks interesting." For the next hour, David and I talked about programming, about the app I was working on, a simple task management tool, and about my journey from Ohio. I was honest about my background, including my Down syndrome, expecting him to politely excuse himself and walk away. Instead, he leaned forward with genuine interest. "You know what I see when I look at your code?" he said. "Clean logic, creative problem solving, and determination. Those are the qualities I need on my team, not a fancy degree." David offered me a position as a junior developer at his company, TechFlow Solutions. The salary was modest, $45,000 a year, but it included health insurance and, most importantly, the chance to learn from experienced developers. "There's just one thing," David added. "We're a small team and everyone wears multiple hats. You'd be doing some customer service, some quality testing, and coding. Are you up for that?"
"I'm up for anything," I replied, and I meant it.
My first apartment was a studio in Koreatown that cost $1,800 a month, nearly half my salary. It was tiny, with a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall and a kitchen so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space that belonged entirely to me. The work at TechFlow was challenging in ways I'd never imagined. I was learning not just about coding, but about project management, client relations, and the business side of technology. David became more than a boss. He was a mentor who pushed me to think bigger and reach higher. "Scarlett," he said one day, about 6 months into my employment, "you have an intuitive understanding of user experience that most developers take years to develop. Have you ever thought about building your own app?" The idea had been percolating in my mind for weeks. I'd noticed that most productivity apps were designed for neurotypical users, with interfaces and workflows that didn't account for different learning styles and cognitive approaches. What if I could build something different? I started working on my own project in the evenings and weekends. It was a productivity app designed with accessibility in mind. Visual cues, customizable interfaces, and simplified workflows that could help anyone, regardless of their cognitive differences, stay organized and productive. The development process was grueling. I'd work my day job, come home to my tiny apartment, and code until 2 a.m. I lived on instant ramen and determination, pouring every spare dollar into app development tools and resources. 8 months later, I had a working prototype. "This is incredible," David said when I showed him the app. "You need to get this to market." But launching an app required more money than I had and more business knowledge than I possessed. I spent weeks researching investors, pitch competitions, and startup accelerators. The rejections came fast and frequent. Most investors couldn't see past my Down syndrome to the innovation I was presenting. Then I found the Accessibility Innovation Challenge, a competition specifically for apps designed to improve life for people with disabilities. The grand prize was $100,000 in funding and mentorship from Silicon Valley veterans. I spent 3 weeks perfecting my pitch, practicing in front of my bathroom mirror until I could deliver it flawlessly. The day of the competition, I stood on stage in front of 200 people and told my story. Not just the technical details of my app, but the personal journey that led me to create it. This app exists because I refused to accept limitations that others placed on me. And now, it can help others break through their own barriers. When they announced my name as the winner, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The validation that comes from proving your worth to the world. That night alone in my studio apartment, I called my parents for the first time since leaving Ohio. "Scarlett, is that really you?" My mother's voice was shaky with emotion. "Hi, Mom," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I wanted you to know I'm okay. More than okay. I'm building something amazing." 5 years after winning the Accessibility Innovation Challenge, my life had transformed beyond my wildest dreams. My app, MindBridge, had become the leading productivity platform for neurodiverse users, with over 2 million downloads and partnerships with major corporations implementing inclusive workplace tools. The $100,000 prize had grown into a $50 million company, and I'd moved from that tiny Koreatown studio to a stunning glass house in the Hollywood Hills. But success, I learned, comes with its own set of challenges. "Scarlett, Forbes wants to feature you on their 30 Under 30 cover," my assistant Jennifer announced as she walked into my corner office, overlooking downtown LA. The MindBridge headquarters occupied 3 floors of a sleek building in the Arts District. A far cry from David's cramped startup space where I'd gotten my start. I nodded absently, focused on the code review displayed across my 3 monitors. Even as CEO, I insisted on staying involved in the technical development. It kept me grounded, reminded me why I'd started this journey. Also, Jennifer continued, TechCrunch wants an interview about your upcoming keynote at the Global Accessibility Summit. This summit. In 2 weeks, I'd be addressing 5,000 technology leaders about the future of inclusive design. 5 years ago, I couldn't get a single investor to take me seriously. Now they were paying me $75,000 to share my insights. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram, another message from someone claiming to be a long-lost relative, probably hoping for money. Since my company went public 6 months ago, I'd been flooded with contact attempts from people I'd never heard of. I'd learned to ignore most of them. But this message was different. Scarlett, this is your cousin Mike from Ohio. I know it's been years, but your parents have been trying to reach you. They're really proud of what you've accomplished. Maybe it's time to come home for a visit. My hands froze over the keyboard. I hadn't spoken to my parents since that brief phone call 5 years ago. I'd sent them a Christmas card with my new address when I moved to the hills, but they'd never responded. I assumed they were still angry, still convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. That evening, I sat on my infinity pool deck watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. My house was an architectural marvel, 8,000 square feet of glass and steel, with smart home technology I'd personally programmed. The guest house alone was larger than my childhood home in Columbus. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding for years. I Googled my parents. The search results were heartbreaking. My father had been laid off from his job at the insurance company 3 years ago and was working part-time at a hardware store. My mother had taken a job as a school cafeteria worker. They downsized to a small apartment across town from our old house. But what really caught my attention was a local newspaper article from last month. Local parents proud of daughter's tech success. The piece featured a photo of my parents holding a printout of a TechCrunch article about MindBridge. My mother was quoted saying, "We always knew Scarlett was special. We just wanted to protect her, but she was stronger than we ever imagined." I stared at that photo for a long time. My parents looked older, tired, but there was something in their eyes I'd never seen before. Pride. Not the condescending pride they'd shown when I completed a simple task, but genuine admiration for what I'd accomplished. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Jennifer, I need you to book 2 first-class tickets from Columbus to LAX for this weekend and arrange for a car service to pick up my parents. Your parents? Jennifer looked shocked. In 5 years of working together, I'd never mentioned my family. It's time, I said simply. I spent the week preparing for their visit like I was launching a new product. I had the house cleaned professionally, stocked the kitchen with food I remembered them liking, and even bought new furniture for the guest suite. But no amount of preparation could calm the anxiety building in my chest. Saturday morning, I stood in my marble foyer, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a black Tesla pulled into my circular driveway. My parents stepped out slowly, looking around in obvious amazement. My father wore the same style of polo shirt he'd always favored, but it looked worn. My mother clutched her purse tightly, her eyes wide, as she took in the house. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, my mother broke down crying. "Oh, Scarlett," she sobbed, pulling me into a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. "Look at you. Look at what you've built." My father stood behind her, tears in his eyes. "We're so sorry, sweetheart.
We were so scared of losing you that we almost lost you anyway." I led them inside, watching their faces as they took in the open concept living space, the infinity pool visible through the glass walls, the city sprawling out below us. But what seemed to impress them most wasn't the luxury. It was the wall in my office, covered with awards, patents, and photos from speaking engagements. "You did all this yourself?" my father asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Not entirely," I replied. "I had help along the way, but yes, I built this company from nothing." We spent the afternoon talking, really talking, for the first time in my life. They told me about their struggles since I'd left, their regrets about how they'd raised me, their fear that they damaged me irreparably. "We thought we were protecting you," my mother said as we sat by the pool. "But we were really protecting ourselves. We were so afraid of watching you fail that we never gave you the chance to succeed." "I understand," I said, and I meant it. "You did what you thought was best with the information you had." "But we were wrong," my father added. "You've accomplished more than we ever dreamed possible. You've changed people's lives with your work." As the sun set over Malibu, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to build something better from the pieces that remain. I want you to be part of my life again, but it has to be different this time. You have to trust that I know what I'm doing." "We do," my mother said firmly. "We trust you completely." That night, as I showed them to the guest suite, my father pulled me aside. "Scarlett, there's something else. We've been following your work, reading about your speeches and your advocacy. You're not just successful, you're making the world better for people like you. We're not just proud of what you've accomplished, we're proud of who you've become." Standing there in my mansion, surrounded by the life I'd built from nothing, I finally felt something I'd been searching for my entire life: my parents' respect.